those of you that are just joining us now, welcome. We're just letting a few more people into the webinar, so just give us a minute or so. Okay, I think we'll get started. So hello, and welcome to the 2023 Global Real Estate Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Survey Results webinar. My name is Carolyn Lane, and I'm Chief Operating Officer of RealPAC, the Real Property Association of Canada. So I'd like to begin our webinar by acknowledging that RealPAC's office in Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, which is signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people as a part of an intricate nationhood that reaches across Turtle Island. So I'm also pleased to welcome today members of RealPAC, also the Association of Real Estate Funds, BOMA, British Property Federation, Coronet Global, CRE Finance Council, NCREEF, NAREM, Oscar, and RICS. So RealPAC, in partnership with Ferguson Partners and 18 other commercial real estate associations globally, recently published the results of the Global Real Estate DEI survey. So this is the third year that we've collectively run this survey, and the extremely high participation we see in the survey, which continues to increase year over year, indicates that DEI is still an urgent and strategic priority for our industry. So the webinar today is going to focus on the North American data set. And to walk us through the results, we're joined today by Deanna Johnson-Salas. She's the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Ferguson Partners, and Lindsay Wilhusen. She's the Survey Director at Ferguson Partners. So this is an interactive session, and after the presentation by Lindsay and Deanna, Zoe Hughes, Chief Executive of NAREM, will facilitate the Q&A session. So again, thanks for joining, and with that, I'll turn it over to you, Lindsay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carolyn. I want to start by thanking you for joining us today, and to all the firms that participated in the 2023 Global Real Estate Survey, as well as the sponsoring associations of NAREM, NCREEF, PREA, RealPAC in Canada, and ULI globally, along with the 14 supporting associations for collaborating with us on this important benchmarking tool. As Carolyn mentioned, I am Lindsay Wilhusen, Managing Director of Surveys at Ferguson Partners, and I'm joined with my colleague Deanna Johnson-Salas, who heads our DEI practice, and the two of us will walk you through the results today. This global survey, which Carolyn mentioned is in its third year, has grown to provide reasonable breakdowns of gender, race, and ethnicity across seniority, job functions, and across the entire commercial real estate industry. This survey is a critical tool for understanding where we are today, and it gives us a benchmark to track progress and drive change. Now, before we kind of dive into the results here, a couple of quick notes about the methodology and the data. As we discussed, it's a global partnership among the 6 sponsoring associations and 14 supporting associations. The third year conducting this global survey, which launched in the summer of 2023, collecting data from July through September, with the results being presented in January of 2024. The survey attracted responses from 236 firms, representing nearly 300,000 full-time employees and about $2 trillion of assets under management. Of those 236 responses, 187 came from platforms in North America, 28 were from Europe, and 21 from Asia Pacific. And as Carolyn mentioned, as we get into the latter part of the presentation today, we will focus on that North American demographic data. In terms of participation, we saw a 12% increase in participation this year compared to last year, and a 35% increase in participation compared to the 2021 survey. So I also want to make a note that this survey was fielded at the enterprise level. So the responses collected were at that corporate level. The demographic data in many cases was based upon how employees self-identified, so we didn't collect anything from individuals with regard to this survey. Kind of lastly, the report itself provides an in-depth view of DEI metrics relating to program structure, resources and ownership, policies and initiatives focused on recruitment, retention and promotion, tracking and accountability, inclusivity, and pay equity, along with employee demographics by gender, race, and ethnicity, as well as hiring, promotion, and departure trends year over year. So what types of firms participated in this year's survey? In terms of the participant demographics, as you can see from the chart on the left, we had a heavy orientation towards kind of the real estate private equity investment management industry. So about 45% came out of that sector, followed by the REITs and real estate operating companies representing just under 20%. AEC firms represented about 11%. And the remaining group was kind of a broad base of different types of firms, including professional service firms, developers, institutional investors, all active within the commercial real estate space. When we look at the demographics by firms of full-time employees, we have about 1/3 of firms who have more than 600 employees in total. And it's important to note here that this is a global number. It's not just specific to real estate for those firms that are part of a broader institution, because we wanted to understand that even if you are, for example, a 100-person real estate team, but part of a platform of 1,000 employees, that brings with it certain resources and additional corporate infrastructure that will impact the approach to DEI within an organization. And then looking at firms with less than 150 full-time employees in total make up about 40% of this year's participation, and the remaining about 27 are from 150 to 600 employees. And lastly, in terms of AUM, you can again see a diverse picture ranging from less than 3 billion in AUM up through more than 30 billion. So this really provided a broad cross-section in terms of the types of firms that were included in the survey. And obviously size will have nuances in terms of how it impacts your ability and kind of the types of programs, budgets, and resources that may be available for DEI initiatives. Just want to make a side note for all those that participated. You received an additional spreadsheet containing all of the data, and that included data cuts where applicable by these 3 categories of business classification, total number of full-time employees globally, and global assets, gross assets under management. Now, this year's survey came at an important juncture as global conflicts, inflationary pressures, and high interest rates are causing concern that companies, including CERE firms, are pulling back on DEI aspirations. With fears that DEI commitments might be stalling, if we look at the chart on the left, it's notable that 95% of participating firms have some sort of implementation, whether it's a formal program or they're enacting some initiatives or policies. In addition, if we look at the chart on the right, 97% of participants said DEI ranked as a higher priority or at the same level as it was 1 year ago. While some firms may have a more robust or more mature program, others may be just in their infancy. However, it does show a priority and one that can be good for reinforcing talent across the entire organization. Participating firms address a number of dimensions of diversity in their DEI initiatives, and that's not just limited to race and ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation, but includes others such as physical disabilities, both visible and not visible, family status, veteran status, and neurodiversity, among others. In terms of employee resources dedicated to DEI, the majority of firms, regardless of their size, have some sort of responsibility. Even the smaller associations with less than 50 employees have over 50% of employees that have some DEI responsibilities within the scope of their duties. With half of the employee population dedicating resources to DEI, the impact can be felt more significantly at smaller firms oftentimes than at larger organizations with more resources. The smaller firms are able to create that culture that really leans into their efforts. So on this slide, we thought it was interesting because there was a shift in organizational support. In 2023, 63% of companies had a formal DEI committee for employees to participate in voluntarily. This is down from the 71% in 2022. If you look at the chart on the right, we are seeing this drop across the board, regardless of company size. This could be due to a shift in companies' priority, the economic downturn, which led to a reduction in workforce in many cases, or the importance of DEI being tied to business objectives. We also saw a shift in leadership in the past year in terms of who makes decisions regarding DEI policies or initiatives. Determining who holds the ultimate responsibility for achieving corporate goals through DEI initiatives is key. In 2022, the DEI team or committee had oversight for the DEI initiatives or had that ultimate decision-making authority. Whereas this past year, C-suite executives led the decision-making. One possible reason for the increase in C-suite involvement could be tied to the overall decrease in DEI practitioners. The decrease in practitioners has been the result of burnout, lack of resources, or companies pulling out of the investment in DEI roles. The attrition rate for DEI roles alone was 33% at the end of 2022, compared to 21% for non-DEI roles. Now, if we focus on the right-hand side of the screen, when asking participants what the most important outcome that would result from successful DEI efforts, it was interesting to us to see a drop in greater diversity at the senior leadership level. In 2022, we saw departure rates of women and people of color at a higher level than their current employee population, suggesting firms have not been successful at retaining people from underrepresented groups at this level. If the focus shifts to greater diversity throughout the organization, including all levels, and more emphasis is placed on an inclusive culture, it might help with those retention efforts in the future.
Lindsay, I'd love to just jump in. We've got a great question here from Nina. And please, everybody, feel free to throw questions into the chat room, raise your hands. We'll absolutely bring you in as we go through. And Deanna, please jump in to answering this question. Nina, do you want to shout out your question? Do you want to jump on camera?
Sure. Just give me 1 second, please. I guess my question is, because COVID was such an unusual time for the industry, for everybody, right? Are some of maybe these numbers in this pulling back? Is it because companies maybe looked at initiatives during that time period to fill work, depending on what they were doing? to take a chance to step back because everybody was trapped in their home, and maybe projects that they had never worked on before were already brought to the forefront. But now that we were back to a new normal, or back to more of a normal, these are maybe some of the reasons that maybe it's taking a bit of a backseat. Has anybody seen or heard of anything of that nature?
I'll chime in there. Hi, Nina.
Hi.
So I'll say the pandemic and social unrest sparked a lot of the efforts. So, I mean, this is the third year in a row that we've done this survey. So very similar to many other industries, 2020 served as an accelerator, not solely because of the pandemic, but also to the igniter of the social unrest surrounding the pandemic and everything else that was going on. We think some of this can be led to the fact that many companies, not all, were hopping on initiatives without them being grounded in company objectives or policy. And now that we're 3-4 years post the pandemic and the rise of social unrest, if you're not grounded, it will be easy to pull back. So those that were already committed to the efforts prior to the pandemic or prior to 2020 still are striving forward. But those that were what we would deem riding the wave, they haven't been able to hold on to their objectives of DEI. And you take that, it being maybe a popularity wave of DEI, was the largest focus since the civil rights movement, if we're being completely transparent about this. And then one last note I'll make is also to market fluctuation. When you have other nuances taking place, it does make it easier to pull back.
We've got a superb question. Vincent, do you want to jump on and ask your question? Because obviously you're talking about, the getting past that learning curve and implementation. Vincent, fire away with your question.
Yeah, I just want to know if maybe the reduction in the effort on EDI is because any initiative always has a big learning curve and as well an implementation period. So I know in our company there was a lot of resources expended on that and continues to be. But obviously when you got a project going on, that it's the major push is always at the beginning, and then you get a little bit more into your normal process of once it's rolled out to the company.
So Deanna, are you seeing that? Are you seeing that, we've gone past that initial curve, but it's that this is when the harder work takes place. So there is that pullback. Is it anything to do with the maturity of DEI programs?
I would say, because the easier part, if we look at it as recruiting, retention, promotion, one of the easiest things to do is recruit. The talent exists. We can bring them into the organization, but if there is no infrastructure and no cultural competency to hold on to that talent, then we will see attrition. We will see the falling back of certain policies. I referenced it last year as DEI 2.0. Now, granted, when I said that, several things that have happened, we can call it DEI 4.0 at this point. But there are levels that take a bit more muscle and organizational structure. So there's only so much we can do on the surface without truly implementing this as a thread throughout the entire organization.
Yeah, both Jasmine and Nina are agreeing with you on the chat, saying, that getting it embedded into the business is a critical component. So thanks.
We'll see that as we move on with the data as well.
Lindsay, back to you.
Great, thanks, Zoe and Deanna. So a little bit of a background about the survey. In this year's survey, we asked companies about a number of policies or initiatives that they enact under the broad categories of recruitment, retention and promotion, inclusive culture, tracking and accountability, and pay equity. We then asked them to indicate if they're currently implementing these initiatives, if they plan to implement them in the next 12 months, or if they have no current plans to implement them. From all those policies or initiatives that are currently implemented, we asked participants to rank their top 3 policies that have been the most impactful working toward their organization's DEI goals. So what you see on the screen here today is the top 10 most impactful policies. In 2023, at the top of the ranking is the creation of scholarships or internships to increase the number of underrepresented individuals in a candidate pool. In 2022, the most impactful strategy was offering a work-life balance. Now, one reason for this change could be due to companies looking to strengthen their future employee pool and create greater diversity throughout the organization. On the flip side, by decreasing programs that promote a work-life balance, that could lead you to a decrease in employee engagement. For example, if an employee starts neglecting their hobbies or family commitments and personal interests due to work demands, it's a sign that the work is overshadowing their life outside of the office, which may lead to employees to become burned out, stressed, show a decrease in job satisfaction, and ultimately a decrease in engagement. Another interesting point that we saw on the slide here is that evaluating employees based on a well-defined predetermined criteria. The decrease in this, which is a good human capital practice, could lead to retention issues. If you're not consistent and properly evaluating employees, it could lead to a feeling of being treated unfairly or hinder one's ability to grow. So without that ability to grow or make progress, it could lead employees leaving for other opportunities. The second most impactful policy for 2023 was providing DEI-related training. On this slide, we can see that over 2/3 of participants are currently providing DEI-related training in the form of roundtables, information sessions, anti-harassment training, conscious and unconscious bias management training, among others here. However, the impact lies in the inclusive leadership training and the training from individuals from underrepresented groups. And Deanna, I'll let you kind of elaborate on this.
Yeah, I think Sonia was already in the chat saying that there's a lack of understanding that DEI learning should be continual and not simply one moment in time. And when we look at this graph, we can see where the largest areas of effort exist. It's more in that one check. We've done our annual anti-harassment training. We've done our annual anti-discrimination training. But when you move further down and you look at inclusive leadership training, leadership for individuals from underrepresented groups, so those that are new into the leadership track within the industry, may be underrepresented and not been in that seat before, and regularly scheduled generalized diversity training, it's only 3.7% of respondents that are focused in that area. And then training for leadership of diverse groups, 2.8%. So there's a large focus on creating programs and scholarships, internships that are targeting underrepresented talent. We should see that generalized training, that inclusive leadership training match that same effort.
Thanks, Deanna. So what are the biggest obstacles? What are the things that are impeding progress to have success in terms of DEI initiatives? If we look at this chart, you can see some of the obstacles to successfully developing and implementing DEI initiatives in 2021 are still a challenge in 2023, with the most common response being a low priority due to other initiatives year over year.
Low priority due to other initiatives year over year has been one of the greatest obstacles, but there's still been an increased effort to recruiting and bringing in more diverse talent. And then followed by no connection between DEI policies and business goals and objectives. I think we hit this nail on the head a few questions ago. But with DEI remaining to be a lower priority, it's primarily because it's not grounded in company policy or objective. So once leaders are held accountable to some sort of metric, whether it be through compensation or whatever that organization decides, we can expect to see an increase in priority once that takes place. That also will ensure that DEI is just not something that we do when we have time, but that it's a mandatory focus ongoing.
I'd love to bring in Jasmine. We've got some great conversations happening in the chat here. Jasmine, you've raised a couple of points as you go through, and obviously this goes to Deanna's point in terms of embedding it in the business strategy. Would love to get your perspective and your reaction to some of the data points.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Sorry, I'm eating lunch as we go through the session today.
Don't worry, feel free. It's a very relaxed conversation. So
this is something we've talked about quite a lot, and especially recently with a lot, I think, within the US and the schools and the conversation that's happening around this space, and perhaps fatigue, reverse racism, like all of these kind of topics are starting to bubble up in this space, right? And so something we quite often talk about here at Hazelview is this sense of belonging. So do we have a place where people feel like they belong? And if we do, then I think that that opens us up into the conversation where, like, continue to bring in that diversity. Where are people starting from? What types of unlearning and relearning needs to be happening? And that really is all the work that happens within the four walls of the business. And it's a lot of conversation. It's a lot, and it takes a lot of time to do that, right? Because you're asking people that maybe haven't ever had to face some of these situations before to think about other people's perspectives. And I think when you start to have those conversations, that's where you really get to learn and unlearn a lot of this work. And then my point in the chat was, like, recruitment in some regards might be the last thing that you tackle, because until people within the business are ready and open and willing to welcome diversity and have those conversations and talk about, you know, the nuances within it, then you're looking at turnover and filling for quotas and all of that, which I don't think this work is actually what it's for.
Yeah.
that's superb. And Laurie, I'd love to, oh, sorry, Deanna, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, to Jasmine's point, the learning, the unlearning, providing a sense of belonging, those are things that you can't see for a while. It takes years and cycles and not an immediate return. And we're in a society and industry where we want it quick. And that is why we have lost almost 30% of the practitioners that we hired over the past 3 or 4 years because of that quick fix. But Jasmine, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think Laurie raised a good point here. She's obviously raising the post-COVID burnout. Don't rely on the volunteer committees, which obviously kind of really sits in with a few of these obstacles as well. So, but very mindful of time. Lindsay, back to you.
Sure, thank you. So over these next several slides, we're going to dive into the findings from the North American demographic data. This was the first year that we collected data separately for Canada and the United States. Of the total survey respondents, 18.6% represented Canada and 69.5% represent the United States. And then it's just important to note that in some cases, participants submitted their employee data for both their operations in Canada and the United States. And if we look at the chart on the right here, it's interesting that 38% of North American participants attempt to collect gender identity outside of that binary male-female definition, which is considerably higher than the other two regions surveyed. Now, if we take a look at the Canadian demographics by gender, at the company overall level, 45.6% of employees are women. This is the highest representation out of all the regions surveyed. Then the percentage of men to women at that junior and mid-level are pretty well balanced. But as we climb that organizational ladder, we can see the representation of women decrease. You know, I'll hand it over to Deanna now. And if you want to talk us through some of the promotions, hires, and departure trends we see in Canada.
Okay. So here we'll talk about the demographics pertaining to promotion, hiring, and departure trends. Something to note as you see all of these figures is that promotions and hires must be greater than the proportion of departures. So the departures must be lower than the promotions and hires in order for us to see an increase in representation. And when I look at this graph, I can't help but think one word, inclusivity, because we're seeing a lack of representation, not just in the women demographic, but in men. And that's the largest representation in our industry. We see men exiting their roles at a higher rate than their employee population at every level except the mid-level. And even at the mid-level, there's only a 1% hold on. When you take a deeper dive, we know that the majority of them at the executive level were retiring, and the rest of them were leaving the industry completely. And at the senior level, they were leaving at a rate of 88% when they only represent 67% of the industry. That's a 20% disparity. So we can expect to see less men at the senior level. We know year over year that has an impact. So this still begs the question why and where are they going? Next slide, Lindsay. These charts break down the US demographics of gender identity. At the overall level, we see 58.6% of male representation and 41.4% of women representation. Here we're focusing on men and women. If we take our eyes to the right, I think the phrase, gender identity, we would take our eyes to the right, we can see that men are in the roles that are considered to be closer to the dollar. They are the deal makers. And women are seen more in the back office, if that makes sense. The leasing, property managers. This is also where most of the ethnic diversity in our industry is employed as well. Next slide. Here we will talk about race and ethnicity demographics for the US. Just to break down the legend at the bottom, when we say POC, we're referencing Hispanic or Latino, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, Asian, American Indian or Alaska Native, multiracial, which means 2 or more races, or they preferred not to disclose. So knowing that the largest ethnic or racial demographic represented in this industry is white, we can take our eyes to the right to focus on that total POC column. As expected, and as it's been year over year, the largest representation, just like with women in some cases, of POC is at the junior level. And the higher we get to the top, the least the representation we see. We can go to the next slide. Okay. Here, this data is focused solely on board of directors composition. Now, the 2 charts that we will highlight on the left is 2022, right, 2023. And the POC population has roughly increased, roughly about 5% or so. Now, for Hispanic women, their population went from 0.2% in 2022 to 2.2% in 2023. And the Black male population doubled as well, going from 2% to 4%. That's growth, and growth in a great way. However, there was no growth for the Black woman population, and there was a decline in representation for Asian women, going from 2.1% to 1.3%. Something that we find alarming is also the increase in not to disclose. Is that due to psychological safety and not feeling comfortable with disclosing? Is there a shift in the level of interest of the topic? It's definitely something to be further explored. Next slide, please. Now, I know this page looks very overwhelming, the charts, the colors, the graphs. There's a lot here. I'm going to do my best to walk you through it. And we'll take a closer look at each level within the organization. We're not going to talk about senior level on this page. It's going to have its own pop out on the next slide. But similar to previous slides, something to note is that promotions and hires must be greater, and the proportion of departures must be lower in order for us to see an increase in representation. And that's what we want. So taking a look at the executive level, we see white women and women of color both departing their organizations at a higher rate than the representation of their employee population. So there's ethnic diversity and gender diversity that is being impacted at the top of the chain. Taking a look at mid-level, it's happening across men and women of color, still white women as well. Higher departure rate than the representation of their employee population. What's extremely alarming here is that we see it at the junior level. Junior levels is where we see our largest representation of women, and we know it's also where we see the largest representation of people of color. So we see white men, men of color, and men and women of color all leaving at rates higher. We know for a fact this will have an impact year over year. So why is there a drop? We can focus on the green boxes, but again, inclusivity is alarming. You know, that's the bell that's ringing. That's something that fosters culture, no matter what you look like, no matter what demographics of diversity you have within your organization. It's for everyone. Next slide, Lindsay. Now, this is the senior. This is pop out of senior level. This is a focus on the year-over-year promotion, hiring, and departure trends for the senior level. The proportion of white women at the senior level has increased from about 21% in 2022 to 24.5% in 2023. And this increase coincides with the rates of hiring and promotion in 2022 that were higher than representation. So this is a huge win for this particular demographic. Women overall made up almost 32% of the commercial real estate workforce in the US at the senior level in 2023, with a promotion rate of 40%. So looking at, if we take our eyes to the right, under 2023, looking at women at the senior level, and we can see that total women. So that bottom right box, that's their attrition level, and it's lower than the total population. Going down to the third bullet, last year we focused a lot on women of color at the senior level leaving at twice the rate that they were hired, or twice the rate of their employee population. People of color overall in 2022 represented 18.6% of employees at the senior level. However, their rate of departure was 27.7%. So when we take our eyes to the right in 2023, we can see that the total POC population is now down to 16.7%. So that's the second over from the upper right, 16.7%. That's a drop, largely driven to the fact that we had one subset leaving at twice the rate of their employee population. So again, when we see that departure rate higher than that population, we know for sure we're going to lose some sort of representation. In 2023, 26.2% of hires and 23.2% of promotions went to people of color. This exceeds the current employee population of 16.7%, as well as the 17.2% departure rate. However, twice as many men of color were hired relative to women of color. So if we look under 2023, we look at POC men, we see that they were hired at a rate of 17.9%. Under 2023, we look at POC women, they were hired at a rate of 8.3%. After already losing a lot of that same demographic in 2022. And now with the affirmative action ruling, accompanied with this being an election year in the US, it's imperative that we maintain a strong focus on the amount of talent that we have leaving our industry and why.
Deanna, do you have any insights? Because I want to bring in Erin Baylog from KPMG with your question. So get ready, Erin, to jump in. Deanna, do we have indications? Are you able to talk through as to kind of some of the reasons for departure? One of the things Erin is asking for is the market condition, the challenging market impacting as well. Erin, do you want to jump in with your question?
Hi all. Thanks. Yeah, I thought that question, that slide in the very beginning that showed that there's, a decline in those focused on specific criteria to measure performance to be very alarming for an underrepresented, a group, representative, like that. That, I guess my initial reaction is, in a tough market that our industry is facing, does that put us, particularly us as women, as well as folks that are persons of color, in a more, tricky situation or more at risk situation? And how much does that, take away from what we're all trying to do here?
Well, that's a loaded question. Because I want to, and I say that it's a fantastic question, but I think when we define tricky or risk, I'm going to go back to last year, because we focused so much on seeing that women of color ratio. It was stark, it was large. And here we are in 2023, we see the impact of that. So to your question, yes, seeing these sort of metrics, seeing the pullback in areas that really do need further nurturing, you can expect to see it impact the workforce year over year, whether it be in retention, employee engagement, a lack of promotion. Because if we aren't focusing on properly evaluating employees, then potentially they aren't getting promotions that they deserve, or they aren't getting proper feedback to adjust certain skill sets in their roles so that come year end, they're equipped.
Thanks for that insight. I also am of the particular view that the hybrid work environment puts underrepresented groups at risk as well. Given, just being able to have access and close proximity, we already are at a disadvantage. And then the hybrid, it continues to exacerbate that, in my view.
There's been a lot of talk about the hybrid work setup and its impact that it has on underrepresented talent. However, we've also surveyed, not this particular one, but we've had conversations, and there's been data collected from that same underrepresented group about the culture that they are working in once they are in the office. So on one end, are they comfortable to come to the office? On the other end, by not coming to the office, do they have that face time and accessibility that they need to further develop and advance?
Fantastic point. Thank you.
Yep. And Deanna, I know you're going to jump into kind of some of the reasons for departure when you leave to join another firm or start your own firm. But what, in terms of, we don't get great data in terms of for departures. It's actually a very big rate that do not declare. We actually only have small data points on that. And that's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
That's correct. So we can only share what we have. But I will say right now, in the beginning, Lindsay did talk about company size. And so smaller companies, they may not have those robust HR programs or structured exit interview programs, but they can still have conversations. So everything can be a data point. So when you do have people leaving, ask, try to get as much insight as you can, and use that as the data point to why, and use that moving forward.
Back to you, Deanna.
No problem. And so as Lindsay shared on the screen for us, I'm gonna enlarge myself again. Thank you. The reasons for departure. Now, these reasons are for when people leave to join and start a competing firm or join another industry. Okay. Now, one of the most compelling narratives is the commonality between women of color and white men. Both of their number one reason for leaving is compensation, which means that the highest paid and the lowest paid demographics are leaving for the exact same reason. So something to explore is the pay inequity no longer tolerated? Is the decrease in the pay gap sending a message? And across the board, the top two reasons for departure are compensation and lack of career opportunities. Now, we discussed previously in the presentation that when it comes to evaluating employees on well-defined and predetermined criteria, there was a decrease in focus. So it is a possibility that the decrease in focus could have an impact on employees feeling that they have a lack of career progression. And there is also similarities in men and women of color, both feeling like company culture, Aaron, this goes a bit to our point on, you know, the hybrid workspace. What type of company culture are you coming into when you are in the office? Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Inclusivity under management. Now, we've talked about inclusivity quite a bit already. In inclusivity comes that sense of belonging. It comes cultural competence. It comes culture overall. And when we looked at the Canadian demographics, we saw that men at many levels are leaving at a higher rate than which they are hired. And the same is happening for white men and men and women of color at the junior level in the United States. Additionally, we highlighted the impact of creating scholarships and internships has increased by over 10%, while the focus on effectively evaluating employees has decreased. Inclusivity under management, or IUM, was created by Ferguson Partners to help our clients and organizations with a more palatable approach to driving positive change, regardless of their organization's DEI maturity. We know that if organizations focus on inclusive strategies that benefit everyone, inclusivity is the way to go. It's great human capital management that strengthens the entire organization, and inclusive leadership is the vessel that helps us all to do our part individually. So what does an inclusive leader embody? Cultural competence, which allows them to demonstrate empathy and awareness of how to understand differences amongst their teams. Servant leadership, seeking to use their position within their organization to empower all members of their team, particularly non-dominant groups. Now, this has nothing to do with ethnic or gender diversity. This could be someone on the team who's at a senior level helping a junior person get their point across or amplify their voice. And this is why inclusivity is as powerful as it is, because it doesn't have to be used in the space of DEI per se. And then last but not least, collaborative feedback. An inclusive leader provides regular, objective, and constructive feedback, but also seeks feedback in return. It's one thing to be able to give feedback. It takes a different type of skill set to be able to receive it. Let's go to the next slide, Lindsay. I want to make sure we leave room for questions. Now, we talked, very early on in the presentation about how efforts have pulled back. There's been a lot of quick fixes. What can we do now? We can recruit right away. We can hire a DEI practitioner right away. But let us not forget that systemic change and doing work that is grounded in company structure and policy, that will be the long-lasting impact. But in the meantime, as inclusive leaders, these are things that we can be doing right now. Let's go to the first bullet. Be open to accepting feedback that is provided. And as I previously stated, it's one thing to give constructive feedback, but it takes a different skill set to openly and wholeheartedly receive it. And the more cultural competent we become, the stronger the sense of belonging, and the more comfortable your team and your colleagues become with sharing things with you. And because you have now increased their psychological safety, it allows them to feel comfortable to share things without fear of retaliation. Next bullet point. Commit to inclusivity strategies that embrace all team members, not just those that are underrepresented. If you begin to schedule regular check-ins and pulse checks with your team, it presents a safe space for all team members, not just diverse new hires. This allows everyone to feel included. It's not my intention to name all of the affinity groups or religious celebrations, but the example could be not just acknowledging Black History Month or Pride Month, but also incorporating Easter and Yom Kippur and Ramadan, giving everyone their sense of importance, their sense of belonging and feeling seen. Next bullet, Lindsay. Encourage open dialogue and exercise empathy. Now, with empathy, vulnerability and humility are components that are often left out of the description. You must be humanistic and humble to truly understand and respect the feelings of others. Topics like parenthood, aging parents or family members, the experience of loss, they have a heavy impact on all of us. They affect the way we work, our mental capacity, and our level of engagement. So having a leader that allows space for us to be human is very important. Of course, the bottom line is the business objective, but you also need to genuinely care about your people. Last one, Lindsay. Reward the champions on your team who foster a sense of belonging. Many organizations in our industry don't have inclusivity tied to any sort of performance metric, which means that many of us take heed to the aforementioned because we know it's the right thing to do. So when someone on your team partners with you on an inclusive leadership journey by ensuring that a new team member feels welcome, or they take an active interest in an area that they don't necessarily identify with, it's important to acknowledge it. Now, I shared on many of my panels last year that my 2-year-old, who survived the first half of his life solely on milk, now has become extremely selective on what he will and will not eat. So this has forced my husband and I to get creative with his meals. We figure out how to hide the veggies to make sure that Ellington gets the nourishment that he needs. Think of inclusivity as the professional way of hiding the veggies. If you have a pulse on this work, you know that it's no secret that it's been a negative shift and DEI is a priority. In fact, some orgs don't want to use the acronym at all, but that does not mean that the work should stop. That's one of the worst things that we can do. What it means is that we must get creative in our approach. We seek out thought partners and we keep pushing forward. Lastly, I'll leave you with a compelling quote from the executive summary. Just as DEI is not an afternoon's training or something to ponder only during Black History Month, DEI is a process and movement to change culture and correct inequities. Thank you.
Deanna, that is superb. I'm going to bring Derek Billsman in. We've got a great question here from Derek. Do you want to fire away your own question, Derek? Derek, are you still there? I'm hoping you are.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Derek. How are you keeping?
Great. Could Deanna add more to an earlier comment? I'm not sure if I heard it correctly, but just paraphrasing that we've lost 30% of recently hired DEI practitioners. I wasn't sure. There was something about that about 20 minutes ago, just on people sort of not really seeing change or meaningful change and leaving the space, and just curious about that because obviously it affects this work.
Oh, Deanna, you're on mute.
That is such a rookie move, sorry. So in 2020, there was, I think, almost a 300% increase in chief diversity officers and DEI practitioner hiring across the board. That was another one of those, what can we do right now? And so when we referenced the 30% decrease in practitioners that have lost their role, it's been a combination of things. Burnout is one, because they were brought in, but the companies had no structure to support them. So they were having to create the policies, create the strategies, build a team to help them support, cross-train that team, and it's not a one-person job. Also, too, when the company's not truly grounded in this work, if it's not tied to a business objective, when market fluctuations take place, that's one of the first things to go.
We've got literally a few more minutes for questions. I can see a few people came on screen, so happy to call on you and volunteer you. Dana, I don't know whether you wanted to ask a question, but this is your chance to jump in. Anyone wants to ask a question? No, are we all good? Ivy, Ivy, I can see you in there. I can see the body language. Let's do Ivy first and then Taya afterwards. Is that okay, Taya?
Sure. Thanks, Thanks, everyone. Ladies, team, it's so nice to see all of you. Thank you again. I don't really have a question. I just have a comment. Thank you again for doing this, for another year. I think it's really important to see the continuity, the consistency, the numbers. And, I was trying to get on camera, but I couldn't. But if I did, you would have seen me nodding and agreeing with all of the conversation around belonging, inclusive leadership, not a standalone DE&I, but really bringing it back into the business. And so Christy Lockridge and I think she was just on camera, just wanted to say thank you very much. We really agree with all of this. Deanna, I think your ending was perfect. I might have to reach out to you to get that quote again, but we're going to use the veggie analogy for sure. So just, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Hi, Christy.
Taya, you had a question. Fire away.
Just a couple of takeaways. So one, it's difficult to digest this much information in real time and give comments that I think are insightful. So I think there was an effort to circulate this before the meeting. That would certainly be appreciated. I wasn't one of the participants to receive it, unfortunately. So I'll do my best to read this and make sense out of it going forward. On that same point, just one thing, Deanna. So to me, this is a report card in a sense, and it's a bad grade. So do we now circulate this report card to the industry to let them know that they need to improve?
Let's call it a progress report, because this is an ongoing semester. Well, I mean, yes, we circulate it.
Thank you.
We circulate it, we get the messaging out. But what I would prefer that we do is not just circulate it, but circulate it with some sort of call to action. Think about what you can do when you are sharing the content, when you are talking with colleagues. I think given that we've taken time out of our day to take in this information and analyze this data, we're now responsible for paying it forward. So we, in our own right, are all inclusive leaders. So my recommendation would be that we're also doing something to move the effort.
Yeah. And Taya, just to confirm, in terms of obviously the survey, what we actually circulated a PDF, a summary of all the data to everybody. That is industry-wide, that can go out to everyone. It's very open access. The Excel spreadsheet that Lindsay mentioned at the start, that is for participants, the 236 firms that actually participated to further slice and dice the data. It is pretty overwhelming. It is amazing data. But that survey is out there. Absolutely, everyone should look at it, read it. Again, the calls to actions. What are you all doing in your firms? How can you push that? Kara, you've got a great question here. You're on about affinity groups. Do you want to fire away?
Yes, please. I found this very helpful and informative. One thing we struggle with, we're about 150 people, so not a huge company, but growing. We have a women's leadership or a women's affinity group, and it's working very well. It's kind of easy because it's gender. I'm the leader of it, so that's been easy. I would love to see other affinity groups, and don't really know how to get those started. I loved your comment about the burnout, because some people volunteer for these things and don't get appreciated, but just wondering if you have any comments or tips for that.
On how to create further affinity groups?
Yes.
Yes.
Really just tapping the leaders. I think, you can say, okay, you're of a diverse, group, but that feels like an imposition, to say, would you lead because you're diverse?
It is. I think they would have to have an interest in it. And I'm happy to talk more about that with you offline on getting a sense of where they are individually, because you don't want to force someone to lead solely because they are a part of an underrepresented group. That is something that is extra on top of workload, and whoever does step up to that to take on that commitment is responsible for guiding and for fostering a culture for all those that align with their form of representation. But I'm happy to support you on that journey. Lindsay, are we going to share our contact information slide? I know I don't know.
Yeah, I can pull that up real quick.
Sure. Yeah. I just don't want to get cut off before people can grab it.
Brilliant. And I can see Larry from Affinius. Larry, I can see you're there poised, ready to ask a question. Fire away. Oh, Larry, are you wanting to ask a question? Larry Mitchell? We can't hear you at the moment, Larry. You're just on mute. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we do have feedback, so I think you've got two mics on.
Is he completely muted now?
Yeah. Unfortunately, Larry, send us an email. You know how to get hold of Deanna and Lindsay. Any final questions before we go? I know Deanna and Lindsay, absolutely delighted to take anybody's questions and chat to people offline. We're all here to help. So no, I think that's it. So one of the things I do want to say is a huge thank you, obviously, to Carolyn and the RealPAC team. Thank you so much for hosting the conversation. Deanna, Lindsay, the work that you put in, obviously, in terms of pulling the data together, validating it. It is a huge effort to pull this survey together. But we're all here. We're all willing and able to help in terms of your DEI journeys. Please reach out to your associations. We're here to support you and let us know if there's anything else that we can do. But just to say a huge thank you to the team. Thank you so much for today's conversations and for all the amazing questions. So all the best, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.